Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 933B, and today's date is March 31st, 2016, and the title of the episode is Checkmate, Putin and Assad outmaneuver the U.S. in Syria. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, out in the South China Sea, the U.S. is continually provoking China, and this is coming from U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Work, saying that the United States is not going to recognize an exclusion zone in the South China Sea, and it views such a move as destabilizing. They have expressed their concern at international court because, as we know, they bribed the Philippines. The Philippines weren't really worried about this until the United States stepped in. Then they filed a lawsuit. And they're trying to push China, and China is not budging. And we can see that the U.S. is continually provoking China in this area. Because you have to remember, they need China, Russia, Iran, Syria, North Korea. They need one of these countries to do something. So they're going to continually provoke each one of these countries. Now, in the corporate media, what they need to do is they need to convince everyone that these are going to be our enemies. Because look, they're not allowing ships near the islands. They're not allowing ships near this part. Can you imagine if China was in the Gulf of Mexico or right outside, offshore, saying, hey, we have the freedom to sail right here? Everyone would be up in arms. The U.S. would be screaming and yelling. Well, this is what's happening out in the Pacific. Actually, the U.S. is across the globe making a big deal out of these little islands after they encircled China with missiles, military assets, and weapons, and Obama came out and said we need to contain China. So you can see why these countries are getting upset. And every time the U.S. tries to provoke them, they're not really doing what they want. But they'll continually do this, just like a bully, where they'll poke, and they're waiting for these countries to lash out. Now, out in Ukraine, we see that Poroshenko is saying that, listen, we're not going to allow the southeastern people to have elections. Even though the Minsk II ceasefire deal said that the southeastern Donbass area will be decentralized and they'll have local elections. And it was supposed to be at the end of 2015. Donetsk and Lugansk put this off and they said, okay, we'll wait until 2016. Well, Poroshenko's out there saying, listen, we're not going to allow this to happen until the OSCE police mission is launched. And we can see at this point, this is never going to happen. So Kiev is not going to follow the Minsk II ceasefire. We're not going to see elections. And we're seeing that this is going absolutely nowhere. This is why the U.S. is continually out there saying, Russia must abide by the Minsk II ceasefire, the country that created it. And Russia's saying, well, Kiev needs to fulfill this point, and this point. They're very specific in what they're saying. Now, out in Yemen, we know the U.S. is involved right now, and they're continually bombing the Houthis, the people in Yemen. And we see there was another strike in Yemen that killed 4 people. And the people that were around this area say it was a drone strike. There was unidentified warplanes that bombed the area. The United States has acknowledged using drones, but declines to comment on the specific attacks. Because they want the puppet government in power. They want the Houthis out. And anyone that opposes the puppet government, guess what? You will be attacked because you become a terrorist. Now, out in Lebanon, we see the Lebanese armed forces have now received a total of 9 Huey-2 multi-mission helicopters from the United States. And what we're seeing is a flood of the Islamic State flood into Syria, into Lebanon from Syria, because they border, and no one is stopping them. They're letting them in, and they're being protected. As Russia and Syria bomb all the different areas around Syria. This is where they're going for safe haven. And the U.S. just delivered these helicopters to patrol the border, to keep them safe. It's very interesting because they're going to use them later. Now, out in Libya, we know the UN-Unity government came in by ship. We know the elected government in Tripoli shut down the airspace, so they decided, hey, you know what, let's come in by ship. And it seems that they're in the capital of Tripoli. And then all of a sudden, gunmen stormed the headquarters of a Libyan television station on Wednesday, as the elected government in Tripoli was demanding the departure of the prime minister, the unity government. All of a sudden, armed men came in. They shut everything down, cut the transmission, and forced the staff out. And we can see that it was a group of armed men, some of them in fatigues. They stormed the office, and they didn't want this broadcast going out into Libya. So you can see right now, the unity government is now making their move. They're going to try to take over in Tripoli. They might have done it already. We haven't had word yet. But we can see whatever happens, it's most likely going to be some type of fight, or someone's going to get killed, so the unity government can have their place. Because their mission is to have the coalition forces get back into Libya, to get rid of those people that oppose the puppet government. Now, out in northern Iraq, we understand that the Iraqi forces are fighting the Islamic State. The U.S. is trying to protect the Islamic State at the same exact time, keeping the Iraqi forces in confusion by firing in different areas. And it looks like they instructed the Islamic State, the proxy army for the United States government central bankers, to move its command center to hospitals and health centers in Kirkuk and use civilians as human shields against government strikes. How very interesting. To keep the Islamic State, the proxy army of the United States government central bankers and the coalition forces, they're going into hospitals because they know this is off limits. They know they're not going to be bombed in these areas. And this is how they're protecting their proxy army because they're stuck. They can't go into Syria. They have no place to run at this point. And this is a problem. Now, Russia, they have hit Syria really hard. In Palmyra, there were over 4,000 terrorists. There were about 25 tanks, 20 units of standard and rocket artillery, over 40 mortars, and 100 anti-tank guided missiles, 50 armored vehicles. In addition, the terrorists had over 100 trucks converted into car bombs. And the Russian warplanes directed 500 sorties, hitting 2,000 Islamic State terrorists in March. This is how precise they are, while the U.S. is continually bombing the infrastructure of Syria, which they have not stopped. Of course, the corporate media is telling you they're going after the Islamic State, which we know is fake, phony, and false. Now, Syria is going to look to Russia and China to help to rebuild Palmyra and the other cities. Most likely, they'll be going to the BRICS Bank to take out a loan. They're not going to be coming to the U.S. at all. And we can see that the Islamic State is being completely pushed out of Syria. The other terrorists are being pushed out. The United States is housing these terrorists in different countries or in hospitals in some cases. And we see that the U.S., their backs are against the wall right now. They don't know what to do. But don't worry, they're coming up with a plan. And they're going to try a diplomatic political plan. They know it's not going to work, but they're going to go down this avenue, make the world think that this is what they're doing. And then everything's going to go crazy because once that stops, just like we saw in the Geneva II, where they said Assad must step down, he didn't. He got reelected. We saw the Islamic State. Well, here we are once again doing the same thing. Now, a new trove of documents has surfaced. Along with oil smuggling, it looks like the Islamic State was selling historic antiquities and they were looting and trading via Turkey. So we can see this is how they were funding their operations. This is where they were getting the funds. And as more and more information comes out, as more and more of these areas are raided, the U.S. just couldn't go into every single place and, destroy the documentation. And a lot of it is being found right now. Because what we're seeing at this point is that the U.S. is covering up everything from the Islamic State by sending in these special op teams. They went into certain areas to cover up the meat of everything that the Islamic State is doing. Certain things are being left behind because the Islamic State is being pushed out of Syria, and the U.S. right now is formulating a new plan, getting ready to push this new plan forward. Now, Assad is out there in different television interviews saying that, listen, if the people want snap elections, he's all for it. Now, this is a strategy that Assad and Putin are using because they know that, Assad and Putin, they came into Syria, they joined up and teamed up to fight terrorism, and they've been pushing out the Islamic State out of Syria. Assad has been in this country fighting this war for 5 years. These people see him as a war hero at this point. His people see him as, yes, this is the guy we want. But we can see there might be a little bit of propaganda out there. The London-based Al Hayat reported that the U.S. and Russia had agreed on a plan that would see Assad take refuge in an unnamed country once a political transformation has had time to take hold. Now, the Kremlin says this is absolutely false. And it says that the Al Hayat published information that does not correspond to reality. And we can see that the US, the UK, they like to put out this propaganda to make people think that Assad is stepping down, he'll be taken away, and there'll be a transitional government. Now, we could tell the story kind of does not make any sense whatsoever. Because why would Assad say he's ready for snap elections if the Syrian people want it? That makes no sense. Why would he just leave his country after spending 5 years in fighting terrorism, which is really the proxy army of the Islamic State, of the U.S. government? It would make no sense. Why would he be working with Putin to restore the country just to have the U.S. come in and take it over? It makes no sense whatsoever. So something's wrong here. Now, the U.S. continually comes out and says they won't accept any government that includes Assad. Now, Assad suggests that the new government would include a cabinet primarily of technocrats and gave the impression that the draft constitution would give way to free elections. And they're saying the draft constitution could be done in a month or two at this point. And the U.S. insisted that Assad would be banned from the elections. Because what are they worried about? They're worried about Assad being reelected. Think about this for a second. Assad regains his territory. He pushed out the terrorists, the proxy army of the United States, with the help of Russia. He stabilized the whole country. He liberated Palmyra. They're going after Raqqa now. The snap elections would be internationally monitored. And Russia would be involved in this. And if the U.S. couldn't manipulate the elections, the Assad most likely would win. Because from all the polls that we're seeing, the people are in favor of him. He looks like a war hero to the people. And the U.S. would be backed in a corner. What do? Their whole idea that people wanting him out would be thrown out the window. This is what happened in 2014. right before the elections, which were internationally monitored, they had the Geneva II talks. The only thing that was on the agenda was Assad to step down. And he said no. They had the elections the end of June. He was elected. And then all of a sudden, in July, the end of July, we saw the Islamic State. Boom, out of nowhere. Well, it really wasn't out of nowhere because we knew at that point, if you go back, that they were training soldiers in Jordan, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, in Turkey. And we knew it was a very big force. We also knew at that time, back in May, June, they brought in a lot of military assets because they were having drills. And the forces there were in the tens of thousands. And after the drills, they just left all the equipment there. Actually, this happened back in 2013. So here we are once again. And Assad and Putin realize that if they have snap elections, the U.S. is screwed. The Islamic State is out of the country. The people want Assad. The whole story is now flushed down the toilet. Checkmate. This is why the U.S. is never going to let this happen. This is why they're preparing their next plan. We know that Russia has brought in their ballistic missile system. It's being set up at the air base in Syria. We understand that the Russian missile ship, dubbed the Serpukhov, has arrived in Tartus. And the duration of its deployment is unknown. Because I think Russia knows at this point that the U.S., Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, they're planning their next move. And they know it's going to be war. And we can see from all the warnings from Australia, New Zealand, United States, Russia, where they're saying that everyone should leave Turkey. Because at this point, we realize they're going to be doing something. Now, the Turkish army is in Syria, and they're fighting inside of Syria. And President Assad says, listen, the relations between the two countries would be good if Erdogan stops interfering in Syrian affairs. Can you imagine what Erdogan would do if Assad had troops in his country fighting? I mean, think about it. All these countries are coming into a sovereign nation and doing whatever they want. No other country would stand for this. Now, there are reports that Turkish servicemen, they're recruiting militants for the Nusra Front. And it looks like they're trying to build up this new terrorist organization with more servicemen because they're getting prepared for something big here. And we can see it's going to happen. Now, they're trying to make the case that a lot of hacks are coming from Syria. The UK says that hackers infiltrated a water utility control system and changed the levels of chemicals being used to treat tap water. And they're saying they did this in the United States, and all the ties to this go back to Syria. So we can see what they're doing at this point. They're getting ready and they're getting prepared to blame whatever's about to happen on the Islamic State or the Islamic State that is attached to Syria or the Syrian forces. However they're going to play this, it has to lead back to Syria. And other cyber attacks will lead back to North Korea, Russia, and China. Most likely those will be the more advanced ones that hit the financial systems, that hit the power grid. So when we put all of this together, we see the Islamic State is being rushed into Lebanon. The U.S. is delivering helicopters to protect the borders. Turkey is training servicemen to join the terrorist groups. There's warnings in Turkey. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, all the other countries had drills where they had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of soldiers preparing and exercising for an invasion in Syria. We have the United States putting out propaganda with the UK, as far as we can see, that Assad's going to step down and leave the area and go to an undisclosed area while the transitional government steps in. Now, could this happen? Maybe. But I just can't see it happening after 5 years of fighting and wiping out the Islamic State. We see Putin and Assad pushing the idea of snap elections. We see the U.S. saying, hey, if there's elections, Assad can't be involved. Well, if the people want him, isn't that democracy? Isn't this what the U.S. government promotes around the world? That if the people want a candidate and they vote for that candidate, that's democracy. It's what the people want. But if they say Assad can't be included, they're going against what people want. Why don't they let the people decide? Russia's been saying it. Assad's been saying it. What are they so worried about? We know what they're worried about. Now, we keep on hearing that these terrorists are coming from the dark web. And there's a new report that all this talk of this dark web is not really true. Actually, terrorists are largely uninterested in communicating through the dark web. The report published by Thomas Ridd and Daniel Moore, researchers at King's College London, created a crawler to categorize about 300,000 dark web addresses on Tor. The researchers discovered a notable lack of any type of terrorist activity in any of the forums, anywhere. And what they did find was there were other things going on in the dark web, like drugs, pornography, criminal activities. And out of the 2,723 active sites on the dark web, they found that 1,547 sites were used for illicit services, but none associated with terrorism. And all they can find is a few handful of active sites that might have terrorist links. So there's really not much going on there. Again, all propaganda to scare you. Now, a top researcher is warning us that the Islamic State could be on the brink of using a nuclear weapon against Western targets. Harvard's Matthew Bunn claims the group is evolving, and they might already have a nuclear weapon. Now, where are they going to get this nuclear weapon? Most likely from the U.S., of course, through CIA, UK, MI6, Mossad, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, who knows? Wherever they're going to ship it in, covertly, create it, build it, we know that these agencies are all going to be involved. In his report, Bunn claimed that there are 3 potential types of nuclear terrorism. And we can see that one is sabotaging a nuclear facility. And they would have to do that through some type of cyber attack or something like that if they can get through all the firewalls and the security. Most likely that's going to be very difficult because a lot of the systems are not connected to the outside world. So they would have to get someone in the inside to connect something in there, just like they did to Iran, where the U.S. came in with Israel and used Stuxnet, and they had to do that physically inside. So they'd have to do that inside a nuclear facility because there's a lot of security in these nuclear facilities, and it's hard to get through. They could use a dirty bomb to spread radioactivity material. Now, we know that Israel has been testing dirty bombs in the desert, suitcase size, and this seems a more plausible way that they would use nuclear material as a weapon, as a false flag. Now, we know that dirty bombs, they really don't do that much damage, but they do spread radioactive material, in the area. And we can see that this would scare a lot of people. And the corporate media would go wild with this, scaring every single one, every single person out there. So if they're going to have a false flag, which we know eventually they're going to do, they're going to most likely use some type of small nuclear weapon to scare the people into doing things they normally wouldn't do. And this is something that we need to look for and keep our eyes open, because when it does occur, it's going to be havoc everywhere. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.